You know, we meet in convention this year at a time that in many ways is difficult. Low oil prices, government deficits, higher unemployment. You know, these are the kind of things that we see in the headlines and hear on the news every day. They cause anxiety, they cause apprehension. But this morning, despite that anxiety and despite that apprehension, I'm going to make a bold assertion. It's the assertion that we've literally put up in lights on the screen and that you see reflected in your convention materials in the convention theme. And that assertion is this: despite the anxiety, despite the apprehension, this is our moment. This is our time. Now, some people might say, whoa, Gil, this isn't our moment. It's the NDP's moment. And all that gloomy stuff, that's the Premier's problem, not our problem. I can see why people would make that argument, but it's not accurate. It's not accurate because this is our moment and this is our time as workers and unions, because for the first time since literally the 1920s, we have a government here in Alberta that actually sees us, hears us, and respects us. Before the NDP, we had a succession of Conservative governments. And I think we all had uncomfortable, sometimes painful experiences with those governments. But we had an experience with a succession of Conservative governments that didn't see working people, and certainly not unions, as part of their constituency, as part of the group that they had to care about. So when we came to those Conservative governments with concerns about labor law and health and safety, or ideas about things that were important to us like childcare, long-term care, pharmacare, instead of listening, they would often scoff at us. They didn't care because, in their eyes, whether they admitted it publicly or not, for them, we didn't matter. In fact, they often felt that they could score points with the actual members of their constituency, most notably the anti-union business crowd. They thought they could score points with that constituency by pushing us around and treating us with disrespect. So this is our moment and this is our time, because for the first time in a very long time, we matter to the people in charge. This is also our time and our moment because we helped create it. People didn't just wake up on May 5th, 2015, almost exactly 2 years ago. They didn't just wake up on that day and magically and spontaneously say, I'm a New Democrat, or I'm going to vote New Democrat. We remember what it was like. They did it in part because Albertans were fed up with Conservative arrogance, with their sense of entitlement, and the PC's knee-jerk right-wing policies. But they also did it because Alberta civil society, led by the labor movement in general, and the unions affiliated with the AFL in particular, the unions in this room, they made that leap, at least in part because we had spent more than a decade actively and effectively critiquing right-wing policies and promoting progressive alternatives. So through all the campaigns that we waged together on health care, on revenue reform, on pensions, through all of those campaigns over all of those years, we planted seeds of doubt about the right-wing approach, and perhaps more importantly, we planted seeds of hope, optimism, and curiosity about progressive alternatives. And in the process of doing that, and in the process of planting those seeds, we ever so slowly changed the political landscape in this province. We redefined what was possible. So to put it another way, all those fights that we led for public health care, our fights for fair wages and for fair pensions, those rallies that we held in minus 45 degrees, our fights against cuts and austerity, our fights for fair taxation and fair royalties, they didn't always result in immediate victories, but they put ideas and perspectives on the table for public discussion that hadn't previously been there. They got people thinking and questioning, and in the process, they helped create the conditions that allowed a progressive government to be elected in a traditionally conservative province like Alberta. But you know what? We in the labor movement, we didn't stop there. We didn't just create the conditions that changed our province. We also rolled up our sleeves and we made change happen in the election itself. I know there are a lot of people in this room who put their money where their mouth was during that campaign. Thanks to our political action strategy that we developed amongst our affiliates and passed at previous AFL conventions, we had the plans, we had the strategy, and we had the wherewithal to capitalize on the moment when it came and to make a very big difference on the ground during that election campaign. So make no mistake, the AFL and the majority of unions in this room, we didn't just talk the talk. We walked the walk, and we mobilized an unprecedented number of members in more than 45 provincial ridings in that election. And together, through years of progressive activism, we helped create the wave, and together, through our commitment to political action and our implementation of political action, we helped ride that wave to victory. So, this is our time, and this is our moment, because we created it. It's also our time and our moment because all the people who formed this surprising government, and everyone, especially people outside of Alberta, they were surprised. They woke up, they saw the news, and they said, what the heck is happening in Alberta? But we knew before Election Day that something special was happening. But I want people to recognize that all those people who make up this surprising, refreshing, and history-making government, they're not strangers. They're not just aloof politicians or out-of-touch cabinet ministers. Instead, they're friends, they're colleagues, and in fact, many of them are literally brothers and sisters in our labor movement. And, we all heard the news and the discussion after the election, and there was much said and written about the fact that half of the NDP caucus and more than half of the cabinet were women. And this indeed is noteworthy, and it's groundbreaking, and it's something that Albertans should be very proud of. But it's also something that we in the labor movement know something about, because for the past 20 years, our labor movement, our little feisty labor movement, in this labor movement that we've created, the direction has very often been profoundly influenced by powerful women leaders. And I am going to embarrass some people here, like Heather Smith, like Elizabeth Ballerman. We are a labor movement that has been led by women, and we're better for it. So it's really nice to see our provincial government finally catching up to us. and the rest of the country. Justin Trudeau got a lot of attention for having a gender-balanced cabinet, but Alberta got there first. But for our purposes today, there's another statistic about the NDP government that's important, and that what I want to highlight is a statistic that hasn't received nearly as much attention as the gender balance issue. And the statistic that I'm talking about has to do with worker and union representation in government. Literally half of the current government's caucus and over half of their cabinet are working people. So they're former union members, they're activists, they're leaders, they're people like you. In fact, they were you just a few years ago. The new government caucus includes 3 people who used to sit as members of the AFL Executive Council, 3. 1 person who used to work as an executive staff member for the AFL. And all of the big unions, all of you, every single big union in this room today has at least 1 member, activist or leader who was elected as an MLA on that day in 2015. Every single one of you. So this is our moment and this is our time, because finally we have working people in positions of power, people like us who share our experience, and perhaps even more importantly, people who share our values and our priorities. But that's not all. This is also our moment and our time because it's working. This government that we laid the groundwork for, this government that we helped elect, this government that shares our people and our priorities and our values, it has done something remarkable and valuable. It has demonstrated that progressive policies, the ideas that we've been talking about, thinking about, and advocating for years, it has demonstrated that those ideas actually work. So in the process, the government has also demonstrated, and this is a really important point, they've demonstrated that working people benefit when they elect other working people. So how different is this government than what came before them? Well, we know what would be happening in Alberta right now if the Wild Rose or the PCs had been elected and if they were in power. In the face of an unprecedented, and some might argue historic, collapse in global oil prices and the recession that it has brought to our province, we know that they would be cutting budgets and cutting services, they would be downsizing, they would be privatizing. And they would probably also be using this crisis to justify a whole bunch of other policies that have nothing to do with recession. They like doing this. When there's a crisis, never fail to capitalize on a crisis, and they never did. So they would, in addition to cutting, they would have been introducing policies that they prefer for ideological reasons, like tax cuts for the wealthy or deregulation for corporations or legislative attacks on unions. So this is not hypothetical. This is exactly what would have happened. We remember what Ralph Klein did when he faced a recession. It was not pretty, and arguably our province has never fully recovered from his cuts and his changes. And if you don't want to just look back, 25 years to Ralph Klein's era, all we have to do is look across the border to Saskatchewan to see what a conservative government in an oil province would do in a situation like we're facing today. And what has Brad Wall done? Well, he is in the midst right now of slashing funding for public services. He's going after public sector wages. And just to make it clear whose side he's really on, while he's going after ordinary people and the things that matter to us, he's also cutting taxes for the wealthy and sweetening the pot for his friends in the corporate world. That's what we would have had right now if we had made the mistake of electing another Conservative government in Alberta. But instead, here in Alberta, instead of the Klein approach, instead of the wall approach, thanks to that amazing election 2 years ago, we have a government that's taking a progressive approach. We have a government that says that laying off a nurse or a paramedic won't bring back jobs for boilermakers or iron workers. We have a government that understands that that kind of action won't fix the economy, it'll just swell the ranks of the unemployed. We've got a government that understands that austerity doesn't end recessions, it just makes them deeper, more severe, and makes them last longer. But the difference that vote 2 years ago, the difference that vote made doesn't end there. Instead of having a government that sees tax cuts for the wealthy as a solution to every problem, we have a government that, despite all the naysaying from the right wing, we have a government that's taking actions on things that we in the labor movement have spent years advocating for, like a $15 an hour minimum wage. Transforming a minimum wage into something closer than a living wage. Like a government that's willing to get rid of the regressive flat tax and increase taxes on corporations so that we have more revenue to pay for our public services. Like a government willing to invest in infrastructure to support our communities and to keep people working during a recession. And like a government that, heaven forbid, is willing to do our part to address things like climate change. So this is our time. You know, and there was a time not that long ago that people would have said that these ideas that have formed the foundation of this new government's policy, they would have said that these ideas are too radical, that they're too crazy. In fact, they're still saying it. Even right now, the Wild Rose Kenny crowd, right? They're not merged yet, but in their minds, they're there. That crowd, that right-wing crowd, they're running around saying that the NDP government is a disaster. We've all heard it. But their story is not the real story. The facts and the statistics tell another story, a much more hopeful story, and a story that we need to be telling and sharing. Because despite the rhetoric from the right, Alberta, which they try to portray as a basket case, the Conference Board of Canada, a very conservative think tank, they project that Alberta is going to lead the country in economic growth, not for just 1 year, but for the next 3 years. Alberta is also leading the country in retail spending, another key indicator of economic health. And just last month, Alberta added 20,000 jobs to our provincial economy. Almost all of them are full-time. No other province was even close. So, you know, Alberta is also seeing increased activity in the energy sector. It's ramping up much faster than Brad Wall's supposedly more business-friendly Saskatchewan. And in the same way that Bruce took some pleasure in Calgary's situation with hockey, I will take some perverse pleasure in the fact that Saskatchewan, nothing against Saskatchewan, but he was supposed to be the apostle for the right. He was supposed to have all the solutions. If that's true, why is Saskatchewan under Brad Wall and under his policies lagging so far behind progressive Alberta? Why? You can look up, yeah. And this is the statistic that I love the best. And get this, you know, Alberta right now, under this radical NDP government, is actually completely smoking other provinces in terms of attracting business investment. It's not even close. It's not even close. So even in the low oil price environment that we're struggling with, the supposedly radical government, this government that we helped create, this government that shares our values, this government is schooling other right-wing jurisdictions and proving the naysayers wrong. And it's doing it not in spite of the policies that we've been advocating for so many years, but because of those policies, because of those progressive policies. So this is our moment and this is our time because it's working. This is also our time and our moment because with partners in government, we can now seriously consider the implementation of ideas and policies that before we could only dream about. Under previous Conservative governments, we in the Labour movement often won victories, but they were usually defensive victories. So for example, we did things that we could be really proud of. For example, we stopped Ralph Klein's third way. Do you remember that? We stopped Alison Redford's attacks on our pension, and that was unprecedented. They actually had introduced the legislation to gut our pensions. It was past second reading, and because of our protests, our activism, our door knocking, our lobbying, they actually pulled legislation that was in front of a Conservative majority government legislature. That has never happened before. So we got really good at stopping their worst, and that's great. It was great at the time, and it's something to be proud of, but it was virtually impossible for us to win support for new ideas and better progressive policies. That's the world that we lived in. But with this government, all of that has changed. There are some things that they haven't done yet, like introduce a universal pharmacare program, but they'll at least consider it in a way that previous governments wouldn't have considered it. And the same is true with all of our other priorities, from protecting our pensions, expanding the Medicare umbrella to cover things like long-term care, better labor laws, better health care, health and safety, a tax system that actually raises enough revenue to pay for our public services. With this government, what's possible has been radically redefined in ways that are profoundly positive for working people. So this is our time and this is our moment. We created it, we're part of it, and we're benefiting from it. While it's never easy, this moment that we've helped create is working, and it has the potential to continue working even better over the next couple of years. So that brings us to this convention today and over the next few days. Over the next 4 days, we want to do a number of things, all in keeping with this theme about this being our time. First, we want to name and claim this moment. We want to make it clear that this progressive moment that we're currently enjoying didn't just happen. It didn't just fall out of the sky. We, as unions, we as activists, we helped create it. We made it happen. So at this convention, we want to acknowledge that fact and celebrate the result. Now, a big part of that celebration will happen this afternoon when we hear from our new Labour Minister, Christina Gray, and also from our Municipal Affairs Minister, Shay Anderson, both of whom will be joining us this afternoon. And we'll also be celebrating it when, upon adjournment, we're going to have a reception with government MLAs in the foyer outside this room. So we will be meeting with our brothers and sisters who are now our friends in government. Second, at this convention, we want to talk about what we're currently doing as a federation and as a labor movement to take advantage of the new political moment and the opportunities for progressive action that it presents. We're going to talk about the working groups of affiliate unions that we've created to help prepare detailed policy recommendations for government. We're going to talk about the coalitions that we've created and the campaigns that we've launched to engage the government. And we're going to talk about the victories that we've won and the progress that we're making. Third, at this convention, we're going to start talking about the new frontiers of the possible. We're going to talk about the ideas and the policies that were out of reach under Conservative governments, but which we can now consider seriously. Things like pharmacare and childcare. Things like fully public long-term care. Things like free tuition. Things like programs and policies to create green jobs and deal with inequality. Coming out of this convention, I'm confident that we're going to have a bolder agenda and vision than we have coming in, and it's an agenda and a vision that can help us influence and shape this province for years to come. And fourth, at this convention, we want to talk about how we can defend this moment and make it last. Related to that goal, we'll be asking questions like, what can we as a labor movement do to help highlight the fact for our members and the public that the government's progressive policies, which we helped develop, are actually working? What can we as a labor movement do to convey the message that progressive policies are the solution, not the problem? That they're actually helping our economy through this recession, improving lives for ordinary working people, and building a foundation for future prosperity. Prosperity that is broadly shared as opposed to concentrated at the top. We're also going to be asking, what can we as a labor movement do to challenge and debunk the naysayers who continue to say that the sky is falling, even though it's clearly not? We'll be asking, what can we as a labor movement do to keep the government focused on bold and progressive policies, the kind that we helped to craft and which helped get them elected? And we're going to be asking what we can do as a labor movement to keep the government honest and connected to the ordinary working people that are key to their re-election. These are the kind of questions we'll be asking and the kind of conversations we'll be having over the next 4 days. But before we get there, in addition to welcoming you this morning and providing framing remarks for this convention, I have one final and very important task to do this morning. And that task is very much in keeping with the theme of this convention, and it is to officially launch our latest campaign, the Unstack the Deck campaign. As most of you know, earlier this year, the Alberta government announced its intention to review our province's two central pieces of labor legislation, the Employment Standards Code and the Labor Relations Code, both of which were written in the 1980s, that long ago, and both of which have not been revised or reformed ever since. So why does this matter? This matters because the rules of the game matter. And for the past 30 years, the rules have been rigged. The playing field has been tipped, the deck has been stacked against working people and in favor of employers. How bad is it? Well, we know in our guts how bad it is, but let's start by looking at the Employment Standards Code, which is supposed to provide the basic floor of workplace rights for the 75% of working Albertans who are not covered by the contracts that we negotiate in the workplace. But when we look at the Employment Standards Code, it becomes clear that that floor that it's supposed to provide, that floor is too low and it's full of holes. Under the current Employment Standards Code, Albertans don't have the same rights and protections as other Canadians. Whether it's hours of work or scheduling or vacations, we are so far outside of the Canadian mainstream that it's not even funny. And don't get me started about enforcement. Under the Employment Standards Code as it currently exists, the rules are weak, but our inspectors don't have the tools to enforce what little protections workers actually have. So, in fact, as a result of the weak enforcement tools, I'm going to ask you this question. How many times do you think over the last 10 years employers have been prosecuted by governments here in Alberta for violating workers' rights under the Employment Standards Code? How many times do you think there have been prosecutions? It's three. 3 prosecutions of employers for violating basic employment rules. And to put this in context, 3 prosecutions in a decade, even when we have 2.3 million people working on 150,000 work sites, and the Department of Labor receives more than 5,000 complaints every year, and we get 3 prosecutions. That gives you an indication of how bad the system is broken and how desperately we need to reform the Employment Standards Code. So then there's the Labor Relations Code, which, as we know, sets out the rules governing how workers can go about joining unions and bargaining collectively. Now, to understand just how bad the Labor Code is, we need to put this in context. And some of the context is actually very positive, because over the last 5 or 6 years, the Supreme Court of Canada has made it clear, they've ruled, that working Canadians have the constitutionally protected right to join unions and to bargain collectively. It's protected by the Constitution. But for our purposes, I think it's important to understand why the court has made those rulings. They've done it in part because they have concluded that unions are good for society, because we provide the only effective counterbalance to corporate power. So we are a social good and therefore worthy of protection under the Constitution. Now, at the same time that the court has been coming to the conclusion that unions and collective bargaining are good for society, at the same time that that's been happening, an increasing number of economists, even from traditionally conservative organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the OECD, they've been coming to the conclusion that unions are also good for the economy. And we've been telling this story for a very long time, but they've come to the conclusion that unions and collective bargaining are good for the economy because we create and support a more robust middle class. And when you put money in people's pockets, they spend that money. And when they spend that money, that's really the engine that drives the economy forward. So unions and what we do are good for the middle class, and that's good for the economy. Those are the conclusions that are being reached by our courts and by economists. But our existing labor code ignores these things. While like the courts and economists are saying that unions and collective bargaining are good and that for the economy and for society and that they should be protected and promoted and facilitated, our existing labor code does the opposite. It was written, as I said, in the 80s, 1988 to be exact. And at that time, you remember what was happening in the 80s, right? Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, the rise of the neoconservative movement, tax cuts answering every problem. They had a vision. It was a very conservative vision. And because our code was written at that time, it was deliberately designed by conservatives to discourage unionization and inhibit collective bargaining. So the bad news is that when it comes to our two basic pieces of workplace legislation, we're far outside of the Canadian mainstream. That's the bad news. But you know what the good news is? The good news is that we don't have to stay there. So that's where our campaign comes in. And that's where you come in. As you will all hear this afternoon, the AFL and all of our affiliates have been lobbying the government, lobbying ministers, lobbying the Premier, lobbying MLAs to change Alberta's workplace laws. We've been doing that for the last 2 years. But it's been our leaders doing the lobbying. But over the last 6 months, it's become clear to us that we also need a big public push to get this challenge of reforming our labor laws over the finish line. Hence, the Unstack the Deck campaign. So, the reality is that there's a very good chance that we're going to see legislation within the next month or two, but it needs a final push. It needs to get over the finish line, and we also need to counter the misinformation that's coming from hostile employer groups. Now, our campaign that you can already see online if you go to unstackthedeck.ca, our campaign has a number of components, and in order to be successful, we need you and your unions to engage with all of those components over the coming month probably month and a half. So the first component of the campaign is the website, unstackthedeck.ca. So please visit it and share it. The second component is the Contact Your MLA tool on the website. Please fill it out and encourage your members, your colleagues, your friends, and your family to do the same. The third component of the campaign is our campaign to lobby MLAs, to get people like you, to get your members meeting with their MLAs. And we're going to flesh out that lobby campaign in a little bit more detail later in the convention. And I just want to emphasize the point that no form of political communication is more powerful than a visit to an MLA from an energized and engaged constituent. So in order to make that happen, we've prepared lobby materials and a lobby plan. What we need from you and from your locals and your affiliate unions is to commit to taking these materials that we've prepared and that will be available at this convention, taking those materials and meeting with your MLAs over the next month. And we need you to commit to mobilizing your members and your locals to do the same. Finally, the final component of our campaign is the rally that I mentioned earlier on. We're having a rally on Sunday, hopefully with a few thousand of our closest friends. It's going to be held Sunday, right after adjournment. And I know everyone's going to be tired by that point, but we're asking for your commitment to attend the rally before you head home. We're also asking you to promote the rally with your locals and your friends during the week, this week, so they know about it. And I want to make it clear that this is not going to be your traditional protest rally, because we do have partners in government now, so this may not be the best analogy, but I'm thinking of it more as a pep rally to encourage the government to seize this opportunity that's in front of them and to demonstrate to their supporters and Albertans more broadly what a progressive government looks like. And in the process to drag our labor laws kicking and screaming into the 21st century. So, our campaign message is simple. 30 years of unfair workplace laws is enough. Now is the time to unstack the deck. Now is the time to bring our laws into the Canadian mainstream and even beyond. Specifically, we're sending the message that now is the time to introduce an employment standards code that gives Albertans the same rights and protections in the workplace as other Canadians, and an employment standards code that actually has real enforcement teeth. And on the labor code, we're saying that now is the time for a labor law that actually allows Albertans to exercise their constitutionally protected rights to join unions and to bargain collectively. Those are our two central messages. So for the next month or two, perhaps, this has to be our priority as our labor movement. This has to be a time for us to seize the moment, and we can't do it without you. So in conclusion, and really this is the conclusion, I just want to say a couple of final words about our convention theme. And this may seem like a gloomy way to end my remarks, but it's important. There are three groups of people who can potentially end our moment and foreclose the opportunities that it presents to us. The first group is obvious, the right wing. So the Wild Rose, Jason Kenney, people who want to return to the previous status quo. And it was a status quo that catered to the wealthy and too often shut everyone else out. So that's the first group. The second group is the government itself. They're not going to end this progressive moment on purpose, but they might let it slip away by getting spooked or losing their resolve. The third group that could end this moment is us. We helped create this moment, so if we stop pushing, if we stop putting ideas on the table, if we stop believing in this new realm of the possible, then this moment that we've created, this time, this special time, it could end. So what do we as a labor movement need to do to stop the right-wingers, to give the government heart, and to make sure that we continue to contribute to this political moment? Well, we need to take on the right-wing naysayers. We need to say, Rachel didn't cause the drop in the price of oil. We need to say that budget cuts won't end the recession, they'll just make it worse. We need to call on the Wild Rose and on the Kenney crowd We need to call them on the fact that they don't really have solutions to the big issues of the day, things like climate change, income inequality, economic diversification, and restoring the struggling middle class. They don't have answers. We also need to help strengthen the resolve of our partners in government. We need to make sure that they know that not all Albertans are critics, even though that's what they hear in social media all the time. We need to let them know that Albertans are looking for progressive solutions that put working people, not the wealthy or the well-connected, at the center of the equation. And they also need to know that they will be rewarded and supported for being bold. Finally, we need to have an internal conversation. We need to have a conversation amongst ourselves as activists and leaders, and we need to have a conversation with our members. We need to make sure that they understand and fully appreciate that this is our moment, that we helped create it. We need to take full advantage of the moment by pushing the government to be bold and progressive, not timid, and we need to continue to work hard to make sure that this progressive moment doesn't end. In the past, our challenge was to make gains and defend those gains in a hostile environment. And guess what? It's the same now. We just happen to have better tools, more powerful allies, and bigger opportunities. But we still have to fight, and we still have to avoid being complacent. Will it be easy? No. Progressive change and progressive governments, it's never easy for us. What we do is always contested. But one thing is clear, this moment, this messy, difficult moment, it's ours. It was created by progressive civil society, and the labor movement is the foundation of that society. As a result of the work that we will do together over the next few days, we'll prepare ourselves for the challenge and the opportunities that lie ahead. Together, over the next few days, we're going to plan. Together, we're going to prepare. Together, we're going to raise a little hell. And together, we're going to make the most of this moment. So let's get started. Thank you.